Hey guys, it's Kevin again, going to be another movie review for guys, and I know I haven't done a regular movie review in so long. It's been a very long time since I did one. The last one I did was for Crimson Peak, and that mainly is because of 31 Days of Horror. I really focused on that, and that's essentially the reason why I wasn't able to, review a lot of movies from this year. But I told myself November is going to be that month where I catch up, I see all the movies I need to see, for my top 10 list. And of course, I want to put together a good top 10 list. And this movie was one of them. There are some bad movies I want to watch as well, just so I can review them to you guys and get those over with, so I have a good worst list as well. But this movie that I'm going to be reviewing, I was definitely very interested in. And I knew this was going to be the first one that I watched out of all the ones I'm trying to watch, because I've wanted to see this movie for so long, ever since it came on to Netflix, and of course, that is the first original Netflix drama. That is Beasts of No Nation. This is a movie I've wanted to see for so long. I've heard amazing things about it. The trailers looked incredible. It really looked like an amazing movie, and I was really hoping for Netflix's sake that it would really be something great. And I heard talks of it getting Oscars and things like that. And I have to say, Beast of No Nation deserves every, critical acclaim it's got, deserves every award at the Academy Awards, because this is by far the best film of the year I have seen so far. Beast of No Nation is without a doubt a masterpiece, and it is simply one of the best films about war I have ever seen, I think, in my entire life. And that's because of how different this movie portrays the subject. And that's something I definitely really loved about this movie. The plot in general is extremely compelling. We focus on this boy. His name is Agua, that's his name. I'm gonna say Agu, that's his name, Agu. He is this, normal boy, but he lives in West Africa, where there is this huge war that's approaching. There's this really bad war going on, and his family is doing whatever he can to protect him from it, and kind of shelter him and keep him away from it. However, unfortunately, they eventually have to leave for the capital because it's just not safe there anymore. But when that happens, his father, older brother, and grandfather stay behind. They end up getting killed, and Agu ends up having to flee away and has to basically join this rebel native defense force, to basically survive. He has to become this child soldier, basically, and that basically, he has to do a lot of things that he's not comfortable with, but that basically is the plot of Beast of No Nations, kind of seeing a transformation into this child soldier, and right away, that's a very interesting subject. I've never really seen a movie like that before. In fact, with child soldiers, and that's something I definitely really love about the movie. What I love the most about the movie is the way the movie portrays this, because this movie is just as much of a war film as it is a character study, and that mainly is because of what I think is the best male performance I have seen all year from Abraham Attah. I don't know how old this kid is. I don't know how old he is. I think he's like 11 or 12. But holy shit, this kid has a huge future. He was amazing in this movie. Perfectly casted. Just perfectly casted. I mean, honestly, he is just everything for this movie. If his acting had not been as good as it was, this movie would have failed miserably. And because of how great his acting is, that's why the movie is so great. His performance as a Goo is remarkable. I mean, this boy is just a normal boy. He just wants to do the normal things a boy can do. And at first in the movie, that's all he's doing. He's doing the normal things. He doesn't fully understand what's going on, and he has to do all these things all of a sudden. I mean, just imagine yourself being put in this position. Your entire family is pretty much killed. You're never going to be able to see him again, and then you're forced to become a child soldier when you're only 11 or 12 as a young boy, and you can't just be a normal kid. This is something that's really hard for Agu to deal with, and especially because how deeply religious he is. The movie isn't afraid to tackle things like that, and I think Abraham Attah really did that perfectly. Something the movie definitely did very well is his narration, especially. His narration is very memorable and very powerful, and you really feel what he is feeling. I mean, you really feel the emotion that he's feeling. And something else that I liked about the movie is that it really is us watching the world through his eyes. For example, his mother is just called mother, his father is just called father. It's all his story. It's his story of him having to rise up and become a lot stronger than he is, and it's very hard to watch at points, because you're just seeing this boy who you see as this innocent thing. You don't want to see, you don't see a little boy as a soldier, but that's what he has to be. He has to be this tough soldier, and it's really hard to watch, but he really does an amazing job. He better get nominated for an Oscar because he really was incredible, and I think he really just carried this film perfectly. He was amazing, and his reactions to what was going on, his emotion, just everything about him was great. And Idris Elba, I thought was just as great as the Commander Commandment. That's basically his name in the movie. Which I like that that's his name. Basically, he is essentially the commander. He is the one that recruits Agu and leads this regiment. Basically, what I love about Commandment though is how vulnerable of a character he really is. I mean, this is a guy that basically just following orders. He has to do what his boss tells him to do. He's not the boss of himself. He's actually not even on the up and up. He's just in a position by this guy, and he basically is forced to do some things that to his men that he probably doesn't want to do, but it's because of how close he feels them. You really feel that he doesn't have much of a life except for when he's with these men, and I think that makes his character very, very compelling. You really feel for his character, even though he is essentially the person that is holding all these kids back, and, you really do feel bad for these kids. You understand he's just doing his job, and if he wasn't doing this, he'd be fired and most likely killed. So, he really doesn't have a choice here, and I definitely really love about his character. His character is probably one of the most tragic characters in the movie, because like I said, he really is alone. We don't, he doesn't have much of a personal life. He doesn't have much of a life beyond this, and it's really sad, but that's just the condition of the world, and I really think Idris Elba did that perfectly, and the chemistry between these two is just great. The bond that they have is fantastic. He really becomes like a father figure for Agu, which I definitely love seeing, and his interactions with all of the regiment was great. There are definitely some really great characters in there, and I definitely think they all did a great job. And then the people that play Agu's parents were also really great. They're not in the movie as much, obviously, because, his father's killed, but he does frequently see visions of them and them talking to him, and I thought they all did a really good job. I like how protective his family was of him. They tried to help him out, even though they knew that it was inevitable that he would find out what's going on. They did whatever they could to keep him from him, because, again, this is just a little kid. A little kid can't fully understand what's going on. They're just not ready for this sort of thing, and they understood that, and I love that. But also, who I definitely feel should get supporting actor is Emmanuel Nil Adam Quaye as Strika. Strika is an amazing character. Strika is basically Agu's best friend that he connects with, and Strika doesn't even talk in the movie. Strika can't talk, and we don't know why, but he doesn't have a single line of dialogue, and he just sells the character perfectly. You see the fear that Strika has, but you also see the inevitability that he has. He knows that this is just the world, and that they have to deal with it, and he kind of grows Agu up a bit, which I definitely love seeing, and the way Agu kind of becomes a brother for him. I just love the bond they had. They all did a really great job, and just in general, the bond that all these men have. They're basically forced to become a family, even if they don't really want to, and I love it about their characters. They all did an amazing job. They all were amazing, and everyone really was fantastic, I have to say. Definitely amazing acting from everyone. One of the best casts of the year by far. Definitely very well casted. And most of it, is known of completely unknowns, which I love. I really hope, though, especially for for Abraham Attah, that this kid does a lot more, because he really is incredible in this movie. And the directing here by Cary Joji Fukunaga is just perfect. The directing that, I don't know if it's a he or she, I think it's a he. I'm just going to check that real fast, guys, because I don't want to mess that up. It is a he. Okay, the directing that he did for this movie was just perfect. He sold the tone perfectly for this movie. This is a very dark and depressing movie. It's not for the faint of heart. It's not something that I would recommend for people that don't like war movies. If you don't like war movies, this movie's no different. It's different from the typical war movie, but it's not less depressing. It is a bit hopeful, though, especially towards the end. You do get a hopeful feel, but you really feel that somber tone very well, and I definitely really love the way he directed this movie. Just incredible directing, and he really directed this movie, I think, differently from other war movies. He doesn't direct this like a regular war film. He directs it as much more of a character-driven film, which I definitely really love, and I think he did a very good job with that, and his directing really was incredible. He wasn't afraid. He didn't sugarcoat anything, which is something I love that he did with the directing. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He wasn't afraid to tell a really controversial story, and in fact, that's kind of that's one of the reasons why, Netflix owned the rights to this film because so many theaters boycotted it, which is understandable. I mean, child soldier is a tough subject to do in this movie, but the screenplay that he did for the movie, because, he also did the screenplay for this movie, which Cary Joji Fukunaga did everything for this movie. I will get into that, but he pretty much did everything. The screenplay he wrote was just great. The best screenplay of the year, by far. An amazing screenplay. I was so into the dialogue. And there are so many scenes that just in general, I think are going to be classic. I mean, there are so many scenes I'm watching, I'm like, I feel like I'm watching a classic movie. And I don't know if that's going to happen, but just from watching this movie, there were scenes here that I feel like are going to be passed on and people are going to remember. Particularly a lot of scenes with Idris Elba's character, with him just telling these soldiers what they have to do and the conditions and the way he prepares them and the way he gets them to basically just, be a united group and basically make sure that they're okay. They're really fantastic scenes and they really sold them all perfectly in terms of the screenplay. The screenplay, like I said, I think is simply the best screenplay of the year. He really did it perfectly and it's such an amazing story. I mean, again, we're really watching this boy, Agu, have to go from this, innocent boy to this really independent figure, which you really do see character development from his character in the movie, but they do it in a very subtle way, and I definitely really loved it. I think they did a very good job with that. And there are some really tough scenes to watch in this film, but again, they weren't afraid to tell that story because this is something that does go on. There are child soldiers in parts of the world. Is it wrong? Not necessarily. I mean, think about the situation there, and there's nothing they can do, really. The only way they can survive is to fight. It's tragic, but that's just the situation, and they need to face that, and eventually they need to realize that's kind of what they have to do in this movie, and I love that, and that's something that you as a viewer have to do. You have to get rid of all your suspicions of, oh, is this wrong? Is this right what they're doing? That's not what the movie's trying to say. The movie's not saying if this is right or wrong what they're doing. The movie is saying this is the situation, this is how they're dealing with it, and there's no going back. There's really no going back. This is what they've done. This is the choice they've made. This is the life they live. And until this war is over, which it most likely probably never will be. I mean, just the way the movie shows it, this is a war that's probably never going to end and probably is only going to get worse and worse as it goes on. This is how they're going to have to live, and I love that. I definitely really love seeing the ending in this, the screenplay of this movie. I will talk about the ending because I think it's the best ending of the year, definitely, but the cinematography is just holy shit. I mean, one of the reasons the movie is so good is I have been looking for a movie that had better cinematography than Mad Max Fury Road. That has been my favorite movie all year long. Beasts of No Nation, like I said, beat that perfectly, mainly because of how realistic they portray war in this movie. War is not portrayed, it's not glorified, it's not something that is light. It is intense, it is brutal, and it is disturbing as hell. There are so many scenes in this movie that are disturbing, and I give so much credit to Cary Joji Fukunaga for telling this, for telling the story the way that he told it. He wasn't afraid to get his hands dirty. He wasn't afraid to show some things that probably other movies wouldn't show, and I love that he did that. Another reason why the theater probably banned this movie. And it's not just because of what you're seeing, it's the fact that children are doing these things. You just get the idea of children doing these things. It's fucking disturbing, and it's no less disturbing if it was, regular soldiers, but just the fact that this is children that are doing these things, I mean, that is very hard to watch, and they really did all those scenes perfectly, especially in the very beginning of the movie. And, the first thing that Ogu ever has to do is kill this innocent man, and you just see that he really doesn't want to do this because this is a man that he really doesn't think did anything, but unfortunately they have to kill him because he's probably going to turn their back on them, and they have to kill him because they need to, train them that way, and it's a really hard scene to watch, but it's definitely very well done. I love that scene, and they really did that perfectly. The cinematography was amazing, and every shot looks great in this movie. I don't know if this movie was shot in real. Actually, yeah, it was shot in Ghana, and I think it's incredible that they shot it there because you really do get this feel of this country that is just, you know, um plummeted by war. I mean, it's filled with war. There's no area where there's not war going on. I mean, there's a scene in this movie where they think they're safe. You know, they're sleeping and then all of a sudden there are like missiles outside. That's how they deal with this. It's really sad, guys, but that's how they deal with this because that's just how the war is. It's that bad. It's that bad of a war. I'm not talking about just like a small war here. This is a war that has expanded and gotten bigger and much more of a threat as the movie goes on. It doesn't get better for them, and I like that. I like that the movie was afraid to put these characters at risk. And eventually, I really didn't know how this movie was going to end, and that's mainly due to just how, like I said, amazing the cinematography was. It really looks fantastic. And also, it's just scenes of them walking through, looking at these beautiful shots. I mean, you can tell that Africa is a beautiful place where they are, but it's very slowly turning to shit because of war, and I think they did that very well. The score is so great to this movie. I'm not gonna say it's an amazing score. I mean, it is definitely an amazing score, but it's not like the best thing about this movie. But definitely a very good score. Very much love the score of this movie, and they definitely did an amazing job with it. I do still think that's the only thing that Mad Max Fury Road did do better, is have a better score than this movie. The movie overall isn't better than this movie, but it did have a better score in this movie, which I will say. The score is not the strongest thing about this movie, but that's fine because scores are important, but they're not the most important thing, and the score was still great. It just isn't really as memorable as Mad Max Fury Roads was. The editing, though, was perfect to this movie. I like to think of this movie as kind of three halves. All movies kind of have three halves, but I really think this movie is three halves. The first half is Agu and his family, them protecting him from the war and everything. The second half is him having to step into this, to this regiment and have to become a child soldier. And then the third half is him basically leading the child soldiers. And I think it's all edited perfectly. And the way they would cut scenes, I mean, that was really good too. And again, like I said, it's all in his perspective. It never leaves his side. Yes, there are some scenes that might not have to do, it's still, that he might not be in the room, but it still affects him. And you really are seeing the characters through him. Everything you're seeing is told through Agu. You never see how the other characters feel. Well, you do see how the other characters feel about it, but everything is told through the eyes of Agu, and I think it just makes it that much better because it's through the eyes of a child, an innocent child, and that's really why I think the movie works as well as it does, and I absolutely loved the editing. Definitely amazing editing. Some people might find it long, but I thought it was perfectly paced. I definitely really loved it, and the scenes of war especially, they go on for a very long time, and I love that because, yeah, wars don't last a short amount of time. They last a while, and these scenes go on for a very long time, but there is still a lot of room for character development. There is still a lot of room for some really emotional scenes, and I love that. And this movie definitely has some of the most emotional scenes of the year. One scene I was almost on the verge of tears by. I will admit to you guys, I almost cried to this movie. It's really, really sad. And I'll tell you guys right now, I'm going to talk about spoilers because this is a movie where I really want to talk about why I love it as much as I did. And in order for me to do that, I need to talk spoilers. So if you guys have not seen Beast of No Nation, please do not watch the rest of this review. Go watch it on Netflix right now. If you have Netflix, you can go watch this, which is awesome. That's something I love about this movie right off the bat, is that you can watch this right now. You don't have to wait for it to come out to other theaters. You can just go on Netflix, and ultimately, I feel this is a future for limited releases. Just put it on Netflix. Honestly, it's so much more easier. It saves money, and it's so much more a convenience. I really hope that they do this with other movies, because that'd be awesome if they did. I don't know if they're going to, but I think that really is a great thing that Netflix is doing, just putting these movies that otherwise could be limited releases or even not released onto Netflix. I think it's an awesome idea, and I love they did that. So let's just get into it. The scene for me that really made me cry was Strika's death. I knew it was coming. When Strika wasn't going to walk and, just wasn't going to, get up, and you see that, Agu has to carry him, I knew the striker was going to die. But it's that more sad because, again, it's a child. This is a child that was weakened by the battle. It, didn't have a lot of food, didn't have a lot of, had to do a lot of things that they probably were not proud of, and that's probably why Stryker didn't talk very much, because he was probably scared so much by just the war, and you really do feel bad for, Agu. But I think this is really the first sign of Agu changing his character, because while this does affect him, he realizes that, strike or die, he needs to move on because there's more going on, and I love that. And the ending to this movie is by far my favorite ending of any movie this year. I mean, the ending was amazing. When they all started turning on, when they all started turning on commandments, you do feel bad for him because he didn't do anything wrong. They're just really upset because they've been stuck with him, and, they don't have any weapons, and he doesn't want them to leave because they're the only family that he has. You really see that in this scene. He doesn't want them to leave. He sees them as his family. He's not trying to keep them there as hostages, but he does see them as his family, and he does see them as this bond that he'll never have again. And he knows that once they leave, he's not only out of a job, he's probably gonna die, and I thought that was just incredible. But of course, they leave because they're out of weaponry. What can they do? They have to leave. And I was surprised that the movie ended with them actually leaving and having to go to a rehabilitation center. But yeah, it does make sense. I mean, they are so affected by this war. And that scene where Agu talks about his counselor and how the counselor doesn't understand Agu and thinks that Agu is crazy. Again, they always say that you don't know what war is till you fully experience it. And you really feel like you've experienced this war with Agu in that scene. And I love that. You really see the change in him. And, he talks about how he used to be a good boy and how he came from a good family. His family had loved him. He doesn't think he's really a good person anymore because of what he's had to do, and because a lot of people don't see them as good people. And you see the bad rep that they have, which I really love seeing, I have to say. That's something that you don't really get to see in these war films. That's something they did very well. And the very end of the movie where Agu joins the other boys is just showing that Agu is now just another member of this military. He's not his own person. He gets to be a child, and, it's not going to last forever, though. And I love how Agu says, I don't know how long we're going to be here. I don't know if we're even going to stay here, but for right now, this is how it is. This is how the situation is. And Agu realizes that the war's still going on. They're going to have to go fight eventually and probably meet up with Commandment at some point. But at least right now, they can just enjoy being kids, which is something that they're never really going to be able to do. They're never going to be able to act like kids because of the situation they've been placed in. You can tell that Agu clearly has PTSD, and I love the way that's portrayed in this movie. It's such a subtle way to end the movie, but it's so inevitable, and it's just such a great ending. I loved it. It's hopeful, but it's also really tragic, and I think they handled that perfectly. But overall, guys, Beast of No Nation is simply the best movie I've seen so far this year. I don't know if that's going to stay, but it definitely so far is, and definitely Beast of No Nation gets a 5 out of 5 or an A+. Go see this movie right now. Watch it on Netflix. It's an incredible movie. It is one of the best war films I've ever seen, and honestly, like I told you guys, I think it really is a classic. Also, guys, when Commandment was berating them for leaving him, that felt like a classic scene to me. Like, when he's like, you're not going to be able to get jobs or anything, nobody's going to trust you, nobody's going to like you. Yeah, it's true. I mean, people don't see, people see these children, they don't see them as regular children. They see them as damaged, and they want to help them, and they're not going to be able to ever do the things that they want to do because of the situation they've been through. And he's right with him saying that. They just don't want to listen to him because of what they've been through, and it's really sad, but that's just how it's gone. But overall, guys, this is my review, Beast of No Nation. Please check out this movie if you haven't. It's an amazing movie. Definitely, I would recommend it to everyone. Honestly, even if you don't like war films, not if you can't handle it. If you can't handle war films, I can understand. But if you don't like war films and they're not the most interesting, I don't find war films as interesting, but this film was extremely enthralling. It is extremely different than any other war movie you've seen, and it really will surprise you, I think. It really is an incredible movie, and definitely, I think, is a classic. Well, that is my review of Beast of No Nation. Hope you guys enjoyed the movie. You guys saw this movie, you have seen it. I will see you guys in my next review, which will be for tonight's episode of Arrow, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.